Welcome to the Brain Game Changer, where heartfelt stories, awareness, and education can change the game. My name is Melissa, and in each episode, I talk with inspiring humans and organisations from across the globe who share significant adversities, triumphs after tragedy, and those game-changing moments to provide you with some useful tools and resources to take with you into your everyday life. In this week's episode, I had the wonderful opportunity to speak with Bronwyn Leeks, who is supporting people with a disability at home, in the water, and with global wheelchair travel. Bronwyn discusses the opportunities of her childhood travels and how she wanted to pay forward these unique experiences with her own children. Fast forward, she talks about her oldest child, Cooper, who was born with cerebral palsy, advocating for him, wheelchair accessibility, navigating family life, and how at the moment has conquered 32 countries and counting. Bronwyn gets candid about how being in fight or flight mode for 16 years led to a breakdown and how everyone should go through one to find out who they really are and what they want in their life. Let's get into the interview. Good morning, Bronwyn, and welcome to the Brain Game Changer podcast. It is great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Melissa, so much for having me.
What a journey that you've been on, Bronwyn, and there's many layers that we could go into. But like I do with all my guests, get a little bit of a backstory, because what I've sensed with you in some of our conversations is travel has been a huge part of your life, and it's been a transgenerational part of your life within your family. Just wondering if you can just share with us how the travel, experiences all came about for you.
So I remember fondly sort of talking to my grandparents about all their travels and looking at all their photos, from the 60s and 70s of what they used to do. And then my own dad and mum met while working for an airline, and then they travelled sort of around Africa together, came back and ended up having me. And then when I was little, my dad also worked for an airline for Ansett. So we had more opportunities than most to jump on a plane and, be able to explore different cities around Australia, and also to be able to go overseas to have different experiences, to be exposed to different cultures and diversity overseas.
I'm going to lean into you sharing a story which you shared off air, but I'm going to get you to share it with us on air, where you were in Queensland and you were visiting, was it the Big Pineapple?
It was. And my siblings and I, so I have two younger sisters, and we were visiting the Big Pineapple, and we had a fruit salad and ice cream, and it was delicious. I still remember it. But it had like little bits of fruit in it, and then we started throwing little bits of fruit at each other just to annoy each other probably. And I think we'd driven up there anyway, so we were all, had been in the car for 3 days or whatever. And then we started throwing a bit of food, and my dad was so horrified because he'd done a lot of extensive overseas travel and had seen, a lot of famine and hunger and, poor living conditions and not much access to food. And he was horrified that these 3 little white privileged girls were throwing food at each other. So he said, that's it. Next holidays, we're not going to Queensland. I'm taking you to Sri Lanka. True to his word, he booked a holiday. Mum stayed at home, and he took the 3 young girls. I think we were 13, 11 and 9 at the time. We hadn't been sort of really overseas much or been exposed to much differences yet. And we got the shock of our lives, but it's remained, with us forever.
So it sounds like some wonderful travel experiences, and yet also being exposed to sort of overwhelming, poignant, humbling experiences where it's just a totally different world and a totally different culture. And that sort of life lesson you can't get in a classroom. You are getting it firsthand right in front of you.
Oh, totally. And I think, we always laugh about it because, during the 80s, you might go to Hamilton Island for a holiday, or you might go to Tasmania. But like my dad decided, Sri Lanka. And at the time, there was a war between the northern Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka and the southern part of Sri Lanka. But Dad didn't, worry at all about that, and just wanted us to see, a lot of difference and people living with not as many material possessions as we do. And it's as clear as anything. I can still smell the smells of walking down the street and seeing people with lots of visible disabilities sort of wheeling around on the street. And it was a massive moment for all of us, that trip. We never looked back really. We just wanted to recreate that and get that adrenaline rush again.
What an experience. And then we're going to fast forward now, and you meet your lovely husband, Andrew, and you both also equally want to instill these wonderful values and travelling opportunities into your future children.
Yes, that's correct. And I think we wanted sort of an opportunity, I guess, to travel together and explore a little bit. And we'd had these plans to go to Vietnam to start exploring together. However, we fell pregnant with Coops quite quickly, more than what we'd sort of thought we would. And we didn't really get the opportunity to travel, just Andrew and I. However, once we then had the children, it was a really, really important thing that we wanted to instill in our kids. And especially due to Cooper's disability, we really, really wanted to show the kids that they can do anything and go anywhere.
That's a great segue, because we're going to lean into, you had plans for travel and then you sort of had your own internal timeline about pregnancy, and then, the universe throws you something else and says, well, here's your little one and it's coming now. So you found out you're pregnant with your first child, Cooper.
Yep. I remember the day actually finding out that I was pregnant. I think I did, I don't know, at least 10 pregnancy tests, because I couldn't really believe that it would happen, sort of so quickly. And we were both super, super excited and, looking back, very, very naive, I guess, in, what can sort of happen during pregnancy or during birth. But we were in a, blissful, 9 months of pregnancy. It was very easy pregnancy, very normal, and decided to come at, 40 plus one day, and he was ready to enter the world.
So we're going to lean into a little bit about that entering the world. Things didn't go normally, traditionally, as a labour goes.
No, that's right. And I think, I often sort of liken it to the fact that the baby that I was pregnant with for 9 months was actually a different baby than the baby that I gave birth to, because the baby that I gave birth to received a brain injury from lack of oxygen and the cord being around his neck and a few other things that sort of didn't go as planned. So essentially I gave birth to a different child who received a brain injury during that birthing process.
There's so many layers to that.
Hours and hours of layers.
I can only imagine. But I'm just going to ask you, to the best of what you want to share and want to say, is after Cooper's born and you've gone through all of that, off air you explained that he's rushed off and you didn't get to spend a lot of time with him. Can you talk us through that moment?
From what I remember is that I still had all those birthing highs, because I'd obviously given birth to a child, but I didn't get to have that traditional experience of holding the child in my arms, or, skin to skin, or breastfeeding, or celebrating, essentially, because I just remember looking out of the corner of my eye and seeing Coops like on the resuscitation table, and he was as white as anything. He'd gone through all the stages of colours and was really, really white, and he wasn't breathing and his heart rate was basically not there. So they were trying to resuscitate him, but I was still sort of feeling quite elated because I'd given birth, but it was, the two feelings didn't sort of match each other. So Coops was rushed off with the neonatal intensive care into a big city hospital, where they sent me a photo of Coops and said, you might not, get to see your baby alive again. Here's a little photo to remember him, or to acknowledge that he had been born.
Gosh, what a moment. And like you say, you're in hospital, you're going through the many different emotions, and your body is also just gone through something so significant.
Yeah, I felt amazing because I'd finally given birth and the pain, from the last 24 hours had stopped. Oh, it was a complete state of shock. And I remember just looking at Andrew, and he was in complete shock, and they were talking about brain injuries, a lack of oxygen, and 50 million people came sort of rushing in the room, and it was like some sort of weird dream. It was very strange. It was like I was looking down on it all. It was very, very weird.
Yeah, very much an out-of-body experience, almost like you're watching a movie that's not happening to you.
Yes. Some sort of nightmare. Yeah.
So he gets rushed off to another hospital. What happens next?
So I just had to stay in the hospital just to make sure that I was okay, because I'd had a few issues and I had to get those seen to. And then the next morning, Andrew came back to the hospital to pick me up. My mum stayed with me that night at the hospital. I don't think I slept. It was only for a few hours. I didn't really sleep very much. And then Andrew came and got me, and we drove into the city to meet Coops for the first time. And he was in intensive care and at the hospital for a month, as he was having a lot of seizures, and because his brain had been so traumatized. And they were just waiting to see really what the effect of that lack of oxygen was going to be.
So after a month, you're allowed to take Cooper home. What's the journey and the process that starts taking place as you step through your doors into your home with a newborn and everything that's occurred?
It was so surreal. It really, really was very, very surreal because we'd had this month of really having to ask permission to have anything we needed to do with Coops. And we then got home and, we were now in charge, except that we would have visits every day from hospital staff and therapists and that sort of thing. So until those sort of visits stopped, it didn't really feel like he was ours and that we had the control over the situation because so many other people were involved, to make sure that he was going to be okay. So it was just it was a very different parenting experience than, you would typically have.
So you're getting a lot of visits. Who's coming to visit you and to support you from the medical?
We had a nurse coming in every day, I think, for about a month, whose name I cannot remember, but she was fantastic. Once sort of the nursing side of things, because that was because he was still being fed through like a nasogastric tube. And then after that, it was a lot of, linking up with a lot of different services for physio and occupational therapy and speech therapy and feeding. And we just hit the ground running, really. There was no relaxing and really enjoying your baby. And it took a long while for like people to congratulate us, I think, for the birth of our baby because everyone was too scared to say congratulations because we didn't know what was going to happen to him or if he was going to survive or what was sort of going on. So I always make it a point now that if I hear of someone that's had a similar situation, I always first congratulate them because you have given birth. It doesn't matter. You need to acknowledge that.
So when did the diagnosis take place that it was cerebral palsy?
So Coops was only like 3 days old and he had all these seizures because of the brain injury and the trauma. And on day 3, when he had an MRI, they did say that they expect that he will have cerebral palsy and, the part of the brain that was damaged. And it was just sort of a wait and see to how his cerebral palsy was going to affect him because everyone with CP is affected in a different way.
So I'm just going to share with our listeners that Cooper has been diagnosed with, I guess, the terminology now that's used is dystonic cerebral palsy.
Yep, just don't.
The part of the brain that was damaged was the basal ganglia, which impacts motor, control, movement, and executive function. That part is situated near the center of your brain that forms the important connections. It manages the signals your brain sends to help you move your muscles. And that's sort of impacted Cooper quite significantly.
Yeah, and that's exactly how he presents in that when he's lying still in bed, you might not necessarily know that he has CP, but as soon as he tries to move, that's when you know that he has cerebral palsy. I think it goes to show, how many muscles in your body you actually have because it affects absolutely everything. And I think originally when they said cerebral palsy, I immediately thought of the comedian Steady Eddie because that was really the only exposure that I'd had to cerebral palsy when I was younger. And I thought, oh, maybe, Cooper will use a wheelchair. And I never imagined how much that his brain injury would affect his speech because of the fact that your whole mouth is full of muscles and the messages getting sent to his tongue and his mouth are, super affected. It's fascinating, really.
Can you talk us through then the first couple of years that you're making these huge adjustments to life with Cooper, who has cerebral palsy? What was, I guess, day-to-day living? What did you have to do? What couldn't you do? How were you going internally as well?
I honestly didn't sort of process it or grieve or anything. I just, as I said before, just hit the ground running and just was doing everything I possibly could to give Cooper every opportunity to be, the best little person that he could have been. And in saying that, I would also allow myself lots of breaks from taking him to therapy because that was a constant sort of smack in the face at something that hadn't gone, how I thought it was going to go. So we would have some days where we would be doing lots of physio and OT and speech and feeding and whatever, and going to different play groups and I guess stepping foot a little bit in this whole disability world that I didn't know existed. And then other days I would just, take Coops down to the park or the beach and try and do what I would think is a typical thing. And I think when you have kids, a lot of, how you parent and the experiences that you want them to have is based on what experiences you had yourself as a kid. I had to learn that, those experiences I had as a kid I wasn't going to be able to portray them as such to Coops because he had a disability, and I hadn't had experience with that of what that disability is going to look like, to parent a child with a disability, let alone him having his own journey of having a disability.
As you stated earlier, and you were talking about, the experiences that were instilled in you growing up and traveling being such a big part of that, when did you decide, I guess, to step forward and go, right, okay, we're going to give traveling a go. We're going to get on a plane and we're going to take Cooper with us and we're going to go experience a different part of maybe Australia or overseas?
Yeah, I think the first trip we took, he was like 6 months. We just went up to Queensland to see all my family because my cousin had had a baby the same time as I did, which was really lovely for the kids to sort of meet each other, but then equally traumatizing because it was a side by side 2 6-month-old babies developing completely differently. After that, when Coops was about 2, we heard of an alternative therapy that was being offered in Singapore. And we thought, well, why not meld these two things together of therapy and his disability as well as being able to access, a different part of the world? Let's just do it. So all of our family and friends sort of rallied around and we did fundraisers, and a really close girlfriend of mine, her parents donated their frequent flyer points to give us the flights. And we raised this money to be able to access this therapy, and we jumped on a plane, and we haven't looked back after doing that. It was one of the best experiences, to meet other families of kids with CP, but equally to have that adrenaline rush of getting on a plane and traveling somewhere different, and the sights and the sounds and the smells, and seeing how much Cooper loved it as well. So we haven't really looked back after that.
Would you like to share about what the what did you call it again? It was
Well, it's like an alternative therapy at the time, but I don't know if it's sort of so alternative now because I think it's probably become a bit more mainstream. But it had a lot to do with sort of massage therapy and getting down into like the really deep layers of like the myofascia in your body and your muscles, and sort of strengthening you from the inside out. It was a big commitment to do the therapy, and we had to learn how to do the therapy and then implement it at home every day with Coops, and he made some massive like physical gains after doing that therapy. So whether or not it was just him or the therapy or a bit of everything, he was then at age sort of 2.5 able to sit and be on his knees, and kind of his whole core strength had gotten a lot stronger. And once that had happened, then the flow-on effects were huge for him being able to be a bit more mobile.
That's amazing, and it's so wonderful that everyone rallied around. You just had the most and still have the most amazing support network and cheer squad behind you.
Yeah. Another funny little story that I just thought of was that from when I was 18 to when I was 28, my parents separated. So they had 10 years where they weren't together. And when Cooper was born, and there was, obviously a lot of trauma and grief and also celebration that because Cooper was the first grandchild, on both sides to be born, that it really, rekindled, I guess, my parents' partnership in that they then realised that life is very short and maybe they can forgive each other for what had happened in their past relationship, and they could get back together. So
Wow.
so Cooper always says that he got his nanny and
Back
puppy
together.
back together.
Yes, the power of
Yeah.
Coop.
Yeah.
I love that. That's
The
beautiful.
power of trauma, You can always tell people that have had something traumatic happen because they're really open and honest and able to say it how it is. So I quite like
Well,
it.
I describe us who have gone through different adversities. I describe us that we're the agents of change, that we are the ones who have seen life through a very different lens. We've had our life right on the line and it could have gone either way. And so when you do make it through, you come out the other side with, like I said, totally different mindset, totally different lens. And we're the ones who now aren't afraid to step forward and be those agents, be the innovators of change, because we've lived a different way.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that I'm, speaking purely from parenting a child with a disability and having that experience of birth trauma and then parenting Coops, but then equally Cooper is on his own independent journey with having a disability. And I would never try and say that I understand having a disability or anything like that because I don't, but I can see, Cooper's progressions and how he's become who he is, because of his disability.
One thing you mentioned earlier is that it does impact the muscles in Cooper's mouth and his speech. And Cooper is emotionally insightful, emotionally intuitive, and intelligent. How did you learn the ways of how Cooper was trying to articulate his thoughts? What was that process like?
So, sort of from early on, we realised that Cooper's speech was going to be affected by his CP. Like, he couldn't breastfeed, he had a lot of trouble drinking from a bottle, he couldn't create sort of a lip seal or have that clear speech. I think when he was about 2, he said the word hammer when he was watching my dad sort of building something on a deck. And it was very, very hard for him to create sort of any lip closure to get sort of those sounds and that sort of thing. But it's only now when we look back at footage and everything that where we taped him was that he was actually talking to us, whereas I thought he was just babbling and not saying anything that made any sense. But now that I know his voice, he actually was speaking in sentences and everything at the age that you would be speaking in sentences. It just took us a while to learn. And we used a lot of visual communication sort of aids around the house and things like that, and a lot of technology, I guess, that was sort of starting to come in. But Cooper's always chosen to communicate with his own voice. He spent a long time thinking it was everyone else's issue, that they were silly that they couldn't understand him. Because in his head, it's all clear and he understands everything that he's saying.
Yeah, and that's understandable. Like you said, like Cooper is very switched on and very part of being present with you in that moment.
That's right. That's right.
It's just his speech and the articulation that's been impacted. But I sort of love the fact that he thought that everyone else had the issue and that it wasn't
It's
him.
hilarious.
I love that.
He's been very egocentric since the day he was born, and he still is. But I remember, I can't remember what class he was in, but we recorded something with his voice and then we played it back, and it was like this massive light bulb moment for him, because he was like, oh my God, that I can't understand. Like, he still can't understand himself when we play back something that he's saying. So he's then got a little bit more empathy for people who can't understand, what he's saying. But he tries really, really hard, and he's figured out lots of different ways to communicate with people, and his speech is getting, much more easy to understand as his mouth's just getting a little bit stronger, I guess, to be able to coordinate it. So I think with his dystonic CP, it's all about, how the muscles are coordinating themselves and him trying to teach himself how it all sort of works, really.
So through this journey that you're going through with Cooper having lots of treatment, lots of physio, lots of alternative options, you also find out that you're pregnant with baby number 2. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, it was probably a good couple of years sort of discussion of whether or not we were going to have another child. I guess I was still quite sort of traumatized about the whole birth experience and things that can go differently than planned. And we were in the middle of this sort of intense therapy for Coops, and, trying to get him to be, as mobile as possible, I guess, that we decided, yes, we will have another child, because the benefits of having another child far outweighed not having another child. And we really wanted Cooper to be able to have a sibling, and for things in our household to be a little bit more balanced. And equally, I really was craving a typical experience. I felt like I was a bit robbed the first time. So I really wanted to just have this typical experience of having a child. And so we decided to start trying to conceive another baby, and that took about 6 months for that to happen. And then we found out that we were pregnant with a little girl who is Cooper's little sister, Pepper.
Beautiful. And what I admire is you decide to take Cooper and your 9-month-old off to Vietnam and backpack for a month. That's amazing. Talk us through that.
I know, I don't really know what we were thinking at the time.
Either amazing or crazy.
A bit of both. So at this stage, Coops is 4, and his motor skills, as far as that sort of goes, he could sit, but basically he still had quite high levels of care and still needed someone to support his mobility and eating and his whole being, self-care, that kind of stuff. And Peps is 9 months old, so obviously still needing all those similar, supports as well. But I think it was the time that AirAsia started having some cheap flights out of Melbourne, and we thought, oh, look, let's just go. And we just jumped on a plane, and we also invited about 20 family and friends along, because Andrew and I had this like faux marriage ceremony in Mui Nei, just north of Ho Chi Minh City. And we just jumped on and off buses, and I had Peps like in a little baby sling, and she was still breastfeeding, and we went up to the hill tribes in Sapa in northern Vietnam, and I sat with the women there, and I was breastfeeding Peps and they were breastfeeding their babies. And We also had Coops in a bit of a sling because he was still, little enough at 4 years old to sort of be able to carry around. And we spent sort of our days eating and chatting with people and swimming and just really embracing, I guess, the Vietnamese culture and exposing our kids to that and having conversations with people about disability and putting it out there, and that it's not taboo and you don't need to hide your child with a disability at home. They've got just as much right and opportunities to be able to, come and explore.
I love your tag on your Instagram page. You've got creating awareness about worldwide wheelchair access, and you've already conquered 32 countries. 32 countries is a lot. You've probably got many stories.
Yeah,
but have you
heaps.
also experienced situations where, like you said, you sat around a beautiful group of women and a community, and you got to share the stories and talk about disability and try and have everyone open and everyone embracing? Have you experienced times where it's been a lot more challenging than that there hasn't been that openness?
My favourite place to travel is anywhere in Asia. And I think culturally, the Asian population is so family orientated and, so loving and beautiful and engaging and accepting. As a Australian traveling to those countries, they are. Maybe it's a bit of a different story within their own sort of culture. Well, I'm sure it is a different story. I have one memory of when we were in Cambodia and I was sitting on the beach and the kids were just having a little bit of a swim, and a lady came up to me and she had tears in her eyes, and, through sort of broken English, she was explaining that she also had a son at home that, had the same situation. And we both, even though there was a language barrier, we could communicate with like a lot of, hand gestures. And by the end of it, we were both just crying, and she couldn't believe that a brain injury could happen, in the Western world, in Australia sort of thing, in the hospitals. And her child's life was very different to what Cooper was being able to experience. But people are always thanking us for bringing Cooper, to different countries and exposing him and exposing them to disability as well. And for them to be able to see Coops accessing things, it gives them hope that, they can also do the same with their children.
What a beautiful moment that you got to share. I find that as well, like my journey's only been nearly 18 months, but there's so many unexpected and beautiful moments that can happen with strangers where you just resonate and connect over a shared experience.
It's an experience that you don't want other people to have gone through, but equally it's exciting when you do find someone that has gone through the same thing, because there's not many people that can understand that birth trauma and that side of things. So it's very nice to have someone that has an amount of empathy about that situation as well.
So also you've got Cooper and you've got Pepper, and number 3 comes along.
That's Woody. So Woody's now just turned 11, and he is an awesome brother to Coops. He is the sort of kid that, says it how it is, doesn't give Coops any special treatment. So Cooper often jokes about the only place that he's bullied is at home by Woody, because no one else bullies him out in society. But yeah, Woody's just really brought us all together really, and just completed us, as a family. And even though it was crazy busy when there were three sort of younger kids, it's been a really, really good balance, because Peps was always really nurturing and caring of Coops, and Woody wasn't. So it gave Cooper a really good insight to how society can be really nurturing, but equally can be quite tough. So he was having some really good life lessons at home before he was having them out in society.
And as more time's gone on, what's their sort of understanding and perception of cerebral palsy now, and what type of language are they using? What sort of awareness as well are they sort of paying forward in their life?
I think with the kids, disability isn't scary to them. It's normal to them. It's just part of, who their brother is. And in having Cooper as a brother, they've then been exposed to lots of difference and diversity anyway. And we have lots of books at home. We have, we watch different movies with different, representation, and we talk a lot about, disability and inclusion just as a normal part of our life. And all the circles we move in are really supportive of people with a disability. So to them, it's just it's their normal sort of thing. And I think they both, in different ways, have sort of taken it upon themselves to educate others. They'll often come home from school and say, oh, Mum, we heard someone say, a derogatory word about someone with a disability. and it's just a normal part of life for them. Equally, it's also parenting. It's very challenging because you've got to balance the needs of 3 children, and obviously Cooper's physical needs are a lot higher than the others now, and it's a constant juggle.
One thing that's really wonderful is, like you say, Cooper's siblings are almost like ambassadors for creating awareness as well. And it's great that they're not afraid to sort of challenge society thoughts or challenge the conversations that are happening in their external world. I think that's really admirable.
Well, that's right, and they, they they often joke about it, but it's really great that their sibling has a disability, because when we go to the airport, we get, put to the front of the queue and get the first people on the plane, and, that sort of thing. But they equally do notice, people looking at Cooper and staring and things like that. And I notice when I watch them interact with other people with a disability, it's not a big deal. Pepper might come home from school and say that, she saw some children with Down syndrome, on the train, and all the other kids were looking at them. But Pepper says hi because she knows that they're people first. So, it's just that. And then she's sort of educating her friends, and then, they'll come over to our house and they'll see Coops, and they can, ask Coops questions and engage with Coops. And then so that flow and effect, that then it's not such a big deal for them.
Can you also talk us through, have you all travelled together as a family to, I know like you've said, 32 countries have been conquered, wheelchair access. How's it been travelling all together as a family, all 3 of you? What's the process in trying to organise that? Suitcases, plane, getting to the airport with everything that you're dealing with.
That's my favourite part, is like the planning and booking sort of flights and accommodation, stuff like that. Our biggest trip we had was when Coops was in grade 6, Pepper was in grade 3, and Woody was in prep. And Andrew had long service leave from work for 3 months. So we decided to take the kids out of school for 3 months and to travel around Asia, just backpack. So we had only carry-on luggage, so 7 kilos like each, just in a backpack for 3 months. And we travelled through China, Mongolia, Japan, South Korea, Borneo, Taiwan, Malaysia. I think that's it. I probably missed somewhere there. But I guess like the places we go to, they're not necessarily wheelchair accessible. We just make it happen. I don't know. So there's some sort of weird adrenaline rush that happens. And
so it sounds like that you guys are off the beaten track type travellers. Can you give us a scenario about how you were, I don't know, faced with the situation right in front of you and what you had to do to accommodate it?
I always think of like when we travelled to India, and like India is not wheelchair accessible. And I think we sort of purposely go to these places that aren't to kind of prove to myself that we can do anything, and that this, as far as Cooper's disability goes, it's not going to sort of stop us. So, we travelled across Rajasthan, this northern state in India, with trains and everything. And obviously it's like these massive crowds of people, and you're just sort of shoving each other and trying to get on a train. And I don't even know how we did it. I think Andrew sort of was like carrying the wheelchair, in one hand, and I might have been sort of holding Coops and then hoping the other kids aren't going to, get lost or whatever. We work really, really well as a team under pressure. There's nothing more exciting than that really big adrenaline rush of like, are we gonna die today? Is this, or are we going
to conquer the day? Are we going to conquer everything?
Are we gonna survive this day? And Andrew and I just seem to work so well together when we're under extreme states of stress. And we sort of just like, run onto this train, and you're not even like thinking straight. You're just making sure you've got the 3 kids in the wheelchair and the passports. That's all you really need. And then we sort of all sit down and collapse, and it's like the best feeling, and we're like all high-fiving each other, and we're so excited that we survived another day. So we're not the type to sort of sit around a resort and relax and enjoy ourselves. We like to be traumatized when we travel. I don't know, it makes you just feel alive.
I can understand that. I totally understand that. So Coop is now 17, Pepper is 14, and Woody is 11. How is life going for you these days? How is everything going? That work-life balance, still attending Cooper's needs. He's also becoming an adult. How is everything going?
Yeah, I think I was speaking to the kids the other day. Well, Coops and I were driving down to Phillip Island, and we were talking about just the changes of parenting, like young ones and then parenting teenagers. I love the ages that they are now. I really enjoy, like, they're proper people. You can talk to them, and they have, you have really good conversations with them, and they're the three of them are quite sort of highly opinionated about things. So I think now Cooper's really taken a lot more charge in like his direction of where he wants to go. So in a way, even though I'm still sort of overseeing a lot of things, he's able to direct his life. And things like with NDIS funding coming through and things like that, he can now make the decisions to employ support workers to support him in what he wants to do, because obviously, you know, I'm working a couple of days a week, Andrew's working full time, the other kids have their activities that they need to be doing. So it's sort of trying to balance out everyone's needs and wants. It's a really good thing that Cooper's now able to, you know, engage the support of support workers and have someone that supports him, you know, to access the gym or to, you know, go out for lunch or to go to TAFE to study music production. And it's working, you know, touch wood, it's all working really well at the moment.
That's good to hear. And as you mentioned, music production, Cooper is actually a phenomenal DJ, and he will also probably agree to that too. You can actually find him on Instagram at DJ Cooper Smith. But his musical ear and his rhythm is quite phenomenal. And he's getting booked for DJ gigs. It's brilliant.
He is. He's got 2 gigs this week actually that he's been booked for. And in December, I think the first 2 weeks of December, he's got 5 gigs. So he's booking up. He's booking up heavily at the moment. He's just done his first corporate gig in the city, which he absolutely loved. And he's actually an amazing DJ, and he's, you know, super social and engaging, and people love, you know, supporting him, not only because he has a disability, but mainly because he's an awesome DJ. So no, it's really good that he's found what he wants to do and what he's passionate about, and he's very, you know, very goal orientated, and he never gives up. He's extremely persistent.
That is brilliant to hear that he's getting booked out all the time. He's going to need a secretary to help support his business.
Well, at the moment, that's me, and I'm doing it free of charge. So he's got no overheads, and he's making more money than I do. So no, he's really, he's doing really, really well. And I never would have imagined that this is what he would be doing now. You never know.
How did he get into the music? Where did it all come from?
He's always loved music, but he had a dream that he was a world famous DJ, and he woke up and he's like, this is gonna happen. And Cooper's got some magical thing that he does, in that he'll manifest something. Anything he says, he'll manifest it and it will come true. So he's very spiritual in that way, that he has an idea and he says it out loud, and then, you know, the next day someone contacts him about something and it happens. So I still haven't quite worked out how he does it, but I think it's quite magical.
It does. It sounds very magical and beautiful. I'm also going to ask, I mean, you said earlier on about that you sort of hit the ground running, and there was lots of different emotions through all this journey, through all of this. And you sort of said there were times you haven't really given yourself the chance to sort of grieve or digest, or really, it sounds like you've accepted everything because there was no other way. But have you accepted everything about what you've gone through and allowed yourself the time and the space to go, holy shit, I really went through all of this?
Yeah, I hadn't up until about 2 years ago. I was having a lot of sort of physical symptoms about 2 years ago, and I thought I was dying. I didn't think I was dying. I just thought, you know, something was wrong with me. And I went to the doctor and I said, look, I think I'm going through menopause. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. You know, like my jaw and my teeth, like everything was so sore. And I said, I think I've got like jaw cancer, or trying to come up with some excuse of why I was feeling really not myself. And then I sort of had a chat with the GP, and he was lovely, and I see him, he was my regular sort of GP. So then he said, okay, we'll do some bloods and just check. You know, he knew exactly what was going on with me, but he wanted me to do all the clinical stuff first. So I went into the nurse and, you know, had to have these bloods, and she just looked at me and she said, oh, are you okay? And, you know, as soon as anyone asks you that question, are you okay? I just completely broke down and was like hysterically crying. And I don't know, I think I'd bottled everything up for like 16 years. And then for the next 2 weeks, I just cried every day and had a big mental breakdown, and my sleep was all off, and I was all over the shop and didn't know who I was or where I was, or it was like my whole brain had exploded essentially, and my whole who I wasn't there anymore. Very strange. Anyway, I just call it a bit of it was a mental breakdown as far as I'm concerned, and a physical breakdown. So I then went and accessed some medicine and some therapy and discussed all these things, and it was all the trauma of Cooper's birth and everything like that had come out, and I had a lot of tears and everything, and went to a few different healers and this sort of thing, and now I've sort of come out of that stage, and I'm so glad that I did that. As a joke, I often say people need to have a mental breakdown. It's very good for the soul. It's no, it is. It's good. It's good for you.
And do you know what? And kudos to you, Bronwyn, that you allowed yourself to go through that. You just totally thought, okay, it sounds like here it comes. You went with everything that you thought it would be. And then in that moment where someone asked you, a total stranger asked you, are you okay? You just totally surrendered and allowed yourself to give yourself to the time to grieve.
It's totally true. And I remember, like, after that, I contacted my sisters and my parents, and they all would, all four of them said, oh, thank God that's happened, and it's about time. So they've been waiting for all these years for me to lose it, essentially. So they were really grateful that surrendered, because I think I'd, put on such a stoic, brave kind of personality or whatever for so long that, yeah, and I love it now. Like, it's made me a different person having that emotional breakdown.
I know you're laughing through this, but I can only imagine what it was like at the time. I mean, I know you've got such a lovely way about how you go about everything. There's so many layers to it. How has it been for Andrew through all of this?
He was quite scared, I think, of what was sort of happening to me, and he just wants everything to be okay, and he wants me to be happy, I guess. And it was very hard for him to see me kind of falling apart, because I think he was so used to me just being in control and taking charge of everything. And it's actually been a good way for me to step back a little bit and have other people like Andrew and the kids to actually, do a little bit more. And it's not all on me. Like, the world's not going to fall apart if I don't do everything or be in control of everything.
You've probably spent 16 years being in absolute survival mode.
Yeah, I've just been fight or flight for 16 years. I didn't know. And then when this happened, I thought, oh my goodness, like, is this how you're supposed to feel? Like, I was always feeling like I just had so much adrenaline running through me all the time that I just got used to it, and I thought that was normal. But now that I don't have that, it's been a real eye-opener to, how you're sort of supposed to feel.
So you have been, like you say, stoic and strong, and you spent your whole time through motherhood going through the journey of Cooper and then Pepper and then Woody. What is something that Bronwyn wants for herself now going forward? Now that you say they're at a great age, they're getting a little bit older, what is something that's on Bronwyn's bucket list that she wants for herself?
I guess I just want to explore, and I want to connect with people, I think. The kids always joke around that I talk to anyone now, but I do, and I love just that human connection, and, just even locally and interstate and internationally, is just speaking to new people and learning about their life. And I really appreciate it when people are really open and honest and raw, and I get a lot out of that, being able to discuss some really deep issues with people that I might have just met, in 5 minutes. And I often find, like, if I'm really open and vulnerable, then they're more likely to be like that as well. So I really like that side of it.
I agree with you. I'm the same. I can do small chat. I can do a little bit of that, but I like a whole lot of lovely, deep and meaningful and purposeful conversations with all different walks of life. That totally fuels my soul. I totally resonate with what you're saying there. So thank you for sharing, and I'm glad to hear that Andrew's going to go along with you. So, Bronwyn, I'm going to finish up this interview with this, asking you the same question that I ask everybody else that I interview. The name of this podcast is called The Brain Game Changer, where heartfelt stories, awareness and education can change the game. You've given us so many different tools and so many different scenarios that you've shared with us today, but if there's that vital piece of information, that golden nugget that you want our listeners to take away with them today, what would it be?
I think for me, it's, say, like, from a medical point of view, not believing like the worst case scenarios that doctors give to you. There's always hope, and there's always community and connection to really, support people to be the best that they can be.
It's really great advice. Thank you so much, Bronwyn.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you found the show really valuable. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, our guests and the topics we discuss, please head over to our Instagram page at The Brain Game Changer and make sure to subscribe and tick those 5 stars so you never miss an episode. In the meantime, continue embracing those game-changing moments. Have a great week and see you again soon. Take care.